there was duct tape on the wrist and across the mouth. Bruises that would basically mimic fingers.
A heinous attack.
They suffocated her till she expired.
A murder with a multitude of suspects.
They've been neighbors for a while, but was there something that happened between them that nobody was really aware of?
Or was this a gang initiation robbery murder? It was a 4-carat diamond worth about $30,000.
The truth will be revealed.
Once you find out there's a love triangle, now you're going to look at the other woman.
If you know details about the crime scene, that means you participated in the crime or you found out about it. So it threw a red flag up to us that we had to watch this guy.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Cordova, Tennessee, a wealthy suburb of Memphis, tucked into the southwest corner of the state.
It's upper middle class. People there are professionals. You know, the houses were big, located on a very nice golf course.
The church is a big part of the community. A lot of our friends have strong Christian beliefs.
And with that privileged life comes security.
In that part of town, you have the car burglaries, the house burglaries, the thefts and stuff like that. Not a lot of violent crime.
But on a warm fall evening in this sleepy southern town, the community's faith would be tested.
Shortly after midnight, on October 26th, Joe Corona came into the police department in order to report his wife missing.
Mr. Corona advised us that his wife had left around 10:50 in the morning that Saturday, and she was driving a black truck. And he hadn't heard from her in like 12 hours.
Detectives immediately put out an all-points bulletin on the black truck.
On October 27th, at about 8:05 in the morning, I was notified of the truck being found in Bartlett, Tennessee. And I'm thinking, the person that they think's endangered, missing for almost 2 days, and now her vehicle's found parked on the street. This is not good.
Law enforcement find the truck on a dead-end street in a rough part of town.
As I walk up and I look, not touching anything, but using my hands to look into there, I'm like, that's a body. We could see the ankles and the legs between the front and back seat. The body had been covered with a towel. The truck was in perfect condition and parked right underneath a no parking sign. And I'm like, why would somebody park under a no parking sign? That started making us think the killer had remorse for the person being dead. It was parked there so they won't sit in a vehicle for weeks, months. They want the person to be found.
The victim is positively identified as 44-year-old Tina Corona.
I remember Tina because she had such a big, beautiful smile and a big personality. A room lit up when she walked into it.
She just would take charge of anything you were working on together, and you just like, man, I want to be on the Tina train. This gal's got it going on. She's a very capable woman and just so much fun.
Tasked with solving the brutal homicide of Tina Corona are detectives Kevin Martin and John Owen.
The strangest thing about the body was that her hands were duct taped together. But it was like they put a piece of duct tape around and just touched it. That didn't appear as though someone was trying to actually restrain her, and there was duct tape across the mouth, but it wasn't covering the mouth. Her shoes were set and the driver's floorboard up beside the seat just sat down real nice and neat. So that didn't really make a lot of sense. It was done as if it were staged. I noticed that the glove box had been rummaged through, but not the armrest. And it was just odd because in other auto burglaries and robberies that I'd worked, if they were going to rummage through one thing, they would rummage through everything. She still had on her wedding band. It was a 4-carat diamond worth about $30,000. I'm not trying to be mean, but if I'm robbing somebody, I'm going to take that ring.
Detectives suspect that they are dealing with a homicide, staged to look like a robbery gone wrong.
We noticed that we had 3 long bruises on the left forearm. Bruises that would basically mimic fingers. They almost looked like 3 fingers of a hand. And then we saw some bruising on her right upper hip and her right inner thigh. Looking at how the body was positioned in the vehicle, looking at the shoes, it would appear as though she had had a struggle with someone. But we didn't believe that the struggle happened inside the vehicle. The medical examiner said it was asphyxiation and wasn't a strangulation. If someone was strangled, there would be marks on the neck or damage to the neck if it was strong enough, and fingerprints and DNA and everything else. Asphyxiation means that the air was cut off, which could have been caused by a garbage bag over the head.
To find the killer, detectives will need to unravel the final 24 hours of Tina Corona's life.
So the only information we had for our timeline was when she was leaving her house at 10:50 on Saturday. And then the ending point where we found the vehicle on Monday at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning.
Detectives canvass the neighborhood where Tina's car was found.
We get information from one of the neighbors who says that she noticed that the vehicle was there about 12:50 on Saturday when she was getting ready to go to work. Now we're down to 10:50 to 12:50, so there's a 2-hour window. Somewhere in between there is when the murder occurred.
Detectives break the news to Joe that his wife has been murdered.
He responded in a breaking down, crying, extremely emotional way.
Everybody loved Joe. He was, the Italian stallion, so to speak.
Joe was selling shoes, and somehow Cupid's arrow struck Tina, and she fell for Joe. I know Tina looked up to Joe, and I know from hearing it firsthand many times how much Joe said he loved Tina. They were just a fabulous couple.
Joe tells detectives they had a great life together.
Tina was very successful. She worked for a financial advising firm and had been working her way up and was doing very, very well financially.
Through some connections, she was able to get Joe into selling annuity products.
She made 6 figures. She took care of him.
They went down to casinos and did vacations and cruises. They were checking off a lot of things on their bucket list all the time.
Tina and Joe were members of the Memphis Corvette Club. They had some classic cars that they invested in. There were 8 cars that were owned by the Coronas. 4 of them stayed in storage and 4 were at the house.
Detectives asked Joe to account for Tina's movements on the day she disappeared.
Joe tells us that they get up about 8 o'clock in the morning and they start doing chores.
About 10:15, she had a phone call with Matt Struna.
We were planning on having this progressive dinner with the entire Corvette Club. You would stop at one house for maybe an appetizer, and then you would drive to another house and have a main course.
Tina had been elected to the presidency of that club, which meant that she was in charge of planning the dinners.
I thought, well, I'll go and help Tina if she needs it. So I called. She did not say she needed any help. Tina is a take charge. I can handle it. Don't worry about it. I've got this.
And according to Joe, about 10:50, Tina had left the house in a truck to go shopping for the Progressive dinner.
So Joe tells us he makes a phone call at 11:30 that he's going to go to his friend's house, Mr. Hathaway, and they're going to work on his vehicle. So Joe drives the vehicle over, and he stays there working on his vehicle until Mrs. Hathaway comes out and says, Joe, you need to get ready for the party. It's coming up pretty quick. So he went home, and he attempts to contact Tina and gets no answer. Then he attempts to call her again at 4:12 and no answer. He calls again at 4:44 and there's still no answer. So he ends up calling someone from the Corvette Club at 4:45 and says, have you heard from Tina in regards to the party? And no one has. The Corvette Club at that point organized search parties to go out looking for Tina.
We did divide up the entire Corvette Club into several large groups, probably within a 20-mile radius. My level of worry was pretty high. Maybe she was carjacked or kidnapped, because Tina wasn't one to drive off and leave family or husband or friends. You knew something was terribly wrong.
It was about 12 hours later, after midnight on the 26th, that Joe Corona showed up at the police station reporting her missing.
To take 12 hours to report someone missing, especially someone you care about, that you're in a longer-term relationship with, I think is very suspicious.
Being the husband, naturally, in most every case, that's your first suspect.
Why do so many husbands kill their wives? It comes down to often control, entitlement, and greed. And there's really no other way to slice it.
With suspicion swirling around Joe Corona in the murder of his wife Tina, detectives check his alibi with neighbor Gary Hathaway.
He did say that Joe had showed up and that they stayed there and they worked on the car the whole time. So Gary was basically with him during that time frame.
After ruling Joe out as a suspect, they ask him who might want Tina dead.
Who would not like her? Who would have something in for her? No one. She was a nice person. She didn't have any enemies.
They then get an alarming call from officers combing the area where Tina's truck was found.
They saw this man out in the middle of the field, which is a strange place for somebody just to be, and so they went up to him.
Detective Owen and I left and went to that location. And when we got there, patrol had detained a gentleman by the name of Jeff Cox. He was armed at the time. This is not right. Something's weird. A lot of times when you have suspects, they want to return to the scene to see what's going on. So it threw a red flag up to us that we had to watch this guy. He was a neighbor of Tina Corona, and he was friends with her, and he was extremely upset with what happened.
He tells detectives that he is familiar with the area where Tina's truck was parked.
One of those streets was a big drug haven where people would come and purchase drugs. And he thought, since he knew the area, that somebody from that drug location might have something to do with Tina's death, and he was going to find the clues to help solve the killing of his friend Tina.
There are many reasons why a killer might lurk around the crime scene after they've killed. Sometimes it's from a place of anxiety. They want to see, have police been called? What is happening? Do people know?
If they have psychological problems, it's a high for them to go back and look at their work. Or sometimes they take trophies. We didn't know if that was what was going on with Mr. Cox.
Detectives consider possible motives.
They've been neighbors for a while, but was there something that happened between them that nobody was really aware of? Was there an interaction, an argument, a fight that might have led Jeff Cox to want to kill Tina Corona?
Detectives asked Jeff where he was during the critical time they believe Tina was killed.
During the time frame that Tina was killed, he was with his wife the whole time. He didn't have anything to do with it. We determined that maybe this guy was trying to be a good Samaritan and be a good neighbor. He just took it overboard.
As strange as it sounds, many of these cases bring these characters out of the woodwork, and they insert themselves early on, and they can prove to be very frustrating distractions that do little else other than muddy the waters, and we see it in this case.
Looking for their next lead, detectives comb over Tina Corona's phone records. They notice something strange.
As the Corvette Club was trying to help find what happened with Tina, Joe Corona was told by someone by the name of Joe Underwood that he had spoken with Tina that morning.
Joe Underwood is a member of the same Corvette Club the Coronas belong to. Joe claims he called Tina to ask her what food she was going to bring to the party that evening.
So, as we're looking through the records, and it shows incoming, outgoing calls, drop calls, everything else, we're not able to find any record on either phone, Tina's personal phone or her business phone, where Mr. Underwood has contacted her.
Suspicious as to why Joe Underwood would lie about talking to Tina on the morning she disappeared, detectives bring him down to the station for questioning.
So Mr. Underwood's telling us that he spoke to Tina between 10 and 12. But we know Tina left at 10:50. And we also know that the vehicle was parked there at 12:50. So he's claimed to have talked to her in this 2-hour time frame, which could have been the time when she was murdered. We present him with this evidence, and he is still determined to say that he spoke to her during that time frame. Why would someone do that?
Detectives begin to theorize why Joe Underwood would want Tina dead.
Was this a power play over her role with the Corvette Club? Was there something more illicit going on? Was he infatuated with her and had been rejected by her?
So we start asking more questions about Mr. Underwood with the individuals at the Corvette Club. They end up telling us that he's kind of on the outside of the inner core of the Corvette Club, and that he wants to present himself in a better light.
Detectives decide to take a different approach and ask Joe his theory on who killed Tina.
And it's here where the ball is put in the suspect's court to offer an explanation that in many cases will reveal that they know more than they're letting on, or will reveal a motive that hadn't previously been considered. Often the suspects themselves are the best sources of information. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, but it's still in the book because it works.
Underwood tells detectives he believes that the motive for killing Tina wasn't a robbery because she was still wearing her diamond rings.
We're like, wait a minute, how do you know anything about rings?
How does he know it other than the fact that he was there?
If you know details about a crime scene and you weren't privy to that information, did you participate in the crime?
Begs the question, is he the killer?
Detectives are working a theory that Tina Corona could have been killed by Joe Underwood, a friend and fellow member of the Corvette Club.
So as we're speaking with him, he says if the rings are there, is one crime, and if the rings are missing, it would be a robbery. And we're like, okay, how do you know anything about rings? He knows about our crime scene.
Underwood then tries to implicate fellow Corvette Club member and previously ruled out suspect, Jeff Cox.
We start thinking, well, wait a minute, why is he trying to throw him under the bus? Why would you try to divert us from talking to you and sending us to him?
People might offer another suspect because they genuinely have an idea it could be that person. Sometimes if it's the perpetrator themselves, they may deliberately try to divert attention away from themselves and specifically onto someone else.
We asked him where he was on Saturday, the 25th, and he explained to us that he was at work from 9 to about 3:20 at his business. We know through phone records and business records that he couldn't have had any involvement because he was 30 minutes away from the scene when it occurred, and we can put him there all morning, so we know he wasn't involved.
Detectives then learn that Underwood has a relative in the police department, which is how he knew details about the crime scene.
His lying, I think, came from wanting to feel important in the case, thinking that it would make him look good in the Corvette Club, and that's not something that you want to do when you're talking about a murder case.
Having ruled out yet another suspect, detectives are nowhere closer to finding Tina Corona's killer.
So the frustration level, of course, is just maxed out, and, there is pressure to solve this crime.
You have to treat it as business. You can't let your emotions get to you. You have to do it based on logic. And that's all you can do.
Detectives return to Tina Corona's inner circle, looking for clues that will hopefully lead to her killer.
So we set up an interview with Tina's brother, Scott, to come and talk with us in regards to Tina and Joe. Scott was not a fan of Joe Corona.
He indicated that the marriage wasn't what it looked like. They put up a good front that they were happy, but truly, behind closed doors, there was something else going on.
He gives us the name of Becky Black, and he says that Joe has been having an affair with her for 10 years.
Joe's affair with Becky is the town's worst-kept secret.
I had gone out with Tina about a month prior to her being murdered. Tina was a little miffed at Joe because they'd gotten in an argument. And I said, well, do you think he's still cheating with Becky? And she just looked down like this. And she said, I don't know. But I knew that she wasn't telling me the truth. And I don't think she meant to lie to me. I think she was trying to convince herself that she didn't know, but she did know.
Once you find out there's a possible love triangle and you can find out who that person is, now you're going to look at the other woman to see if that's the person who's the one who might have murdered Tina.
We often think about a jealous or jilted male eliminating his rival. There are cases where, and it stands to reason, a female will take out her rival, the other female, in order to claim the man. This boils down to simple territoriality.
Detectives shift the focus of their investigation onto the woman Joe was having an affair with, Becky Black.
We find out where she lives, and we go to see her because we want to interview her. And it just so happens the day that we go to the house is the day of the viewing of Tina Corona. She sees us, and she's not sure what's going on, and I explained to her who I am, and that I needed to speak with her about her relationship with Joe and Tina Corona. She basically went sideways, her knees buckled, and she hit the side of the wall to hold herself up. She almost fell. When I saw her knees buckle, I said, she knows something. She has more information that's going to help us with this investigation. That's what I knew.
Down at the station, Detectives questioned Becky about her relationship with Joe Corona.
She said, well, we were just friends, my husband and I, and we would go over and get in the hot tub together. We would do things together, but it wasn't any big deal. She never admitted to an affair.
As she denies this relationship other than the friendship, we're thinking that she's not being totally honest with us.
If Becky's going to lie about this and try to cover it up, then what else is she going to cover up and lie about?
All lies boil down to one thing. Fear. People will lie because they're afraid of the consequences of telling the truth.
At that point, we began to look at her as a potential suspect also. Could she have tried to get Tina out of the way so she could have Joe?
Did Joe say, I'm going to leave Tina for you? And that wasn't happening, or it was taking too long to happen? Was Becky done waiting on that? So she took things into her own hands.
Sometimes when people are part of love triangles, especially rivalrous ones, things can go wrong. Jealousy can be a very powerful motive for murder.
Detectives suspect that Tina Corona might have been murdered by her husband's jealous mistress, Becky Black.
In order to try to eliminate or include Becky as a suspect, we ask for some DNA and for fingerprints. She cooperates, but then she tells the police, I've been in that truck, so I wouldn't be surprised if you found my fingerprints.
But detectives find more than her fingerprints.
We ask, is there a reason why any of your bodily fluids would be in that vehicle? And she explained to us, yes, she and Joe had performed a sexual act in the vehicle.
She came clean with everything. She told us what was going on. She was the other lady in the story, the girlfriend. And she was married. He was married, so they're having an extramarital affair.
Having linked Becky to the crime scene, detectives ask for her whereabouts during the window of time Tina Corona was murdered.
She had said that she'd been out of town. She'd gone with her family into a bonfire in another county that was about 20, 30 miles away, and then had gone to a funeral.
Detectives investigate her alibi by talking with witnesses at the funeral and checking her phone records.
The time of the death, we estimated somewhere between 10 and 12:50 on Saturday, October 25th. Well, for Becky Black, she was out of town at that time at a funeral. It wasn't possible for her to have done it, so she was ruled out as a suspect.
Having eliminated Becky Black as a suspect, detectives refocus their investigation on her lover Joe.
We have this love triangle, so now we're thinking, did Joe kill his wife?
Detectives ask Becky if she'd be willing to wear a wire.
And she agreed to that. So when she met with him, she started talking about what really happened with Tina.
I just gotta know that everything's gonna be okay.
You and I are connected at the soul. You and I are meant to be together.
I know, but I just keep hearing all this stuff.
About what?
About Tina.
What about her?
All this time, I just kept thinking that maybe, you may have done that for me, thinking that was the only way that you could get me. At first I was scared, and then I thought if you did, that made me feel special.
I didn't do it. Okay? And when I say I would do anything for you, I mean I wouldn't do something like that.
Well, how do I know a year down the road you're not going to get tired of me?
You know that I have never been mad at you. Everything that I have, I would
that point is when her whole attitude toward him changed. That gave her a real fear of him.
While not a confession, it encourages detectives to delve further into Joe's potential motive to want Tina dead.
One of the reasons why a husband might kill his wife is because he's tired of living the double life and simply wants to start again with his mistress. It also helps if he could benefit from a life insurance policy or could be getting some money out of his wife's death.
He's been having an affair for 10 years. His wife has money, so why would he kill Tina at this point? He's got his cake and he's eating it too, so why would he have to kill her?
So then we say, let's dig deeper into the personal finances of Tina and Joe and see what's going on. What else makes people want to murder their wives?
Detectives get their answer when they speak to Carrie Brown, one of Tina's closest friends.
Tina had had dinner with Carrie about 5 days before she went missing, and Tina was expressing her concern about some missing money. Tina and Joe had been trying to get a bigger house. But every time they went to get a bigger house, something would fall through, the paperwork wasn't finished.
Tina's like, I don't see how there's any problem with our finances, because everything's paid for and we got great credit and da-da-da. And it ended up that Tina started doubting why she couldn't buy this house. She started thinking maybe there's something wrong. Joe takes care of the bills and he takes care of Tina. Whatever Tina wants, he makes sure Tina has. So Tina doesn't worry about the bills. Probably Tina doesn't see the bills.
So she's looking toward Joe for some answers. And Joe Corona, being the personality that he is, that certainly was a big hit to his ego.
Working the theory Joe was deceiving Tina about their finances, detectives check into his business dealings and make a shocking discovery.
The deeper I dug, I started finding out things that just didn't make sense. What he was presenting to the customer versus what he was purchasing for the customer was a large difference. He would sell the customer a $50,000 annuity. In their mind, turned out to be a $5,000 annuity. And then he would take and change the paperwork.
Joe was pocketing the $45,000 difference, essentially stealing the retirement funds of clients. But his deceitful actions didn't end there.
Joe had actually cashed in a $26,000 annuity that was in Tina's name.
So he's got motive now.
So we need to find out if he had the opportunity to kill Tina.
Detectives now believe that Joe Corona may have killed his wife Tina because she learned he was defrauding both her and his clients.
So now we've gone back in the investigation to the very beginning to track Joe's movement, to see if we can ping his cell phone from some of the towers around town to see where he was during that 2-hour period that Tina had gone missing.
Joe originally said that he drove from home straight to his friend Gary Hathaway's house, where he stayed working on his car until 4 p.m.
We know through phone records that at 12:22, Joe's phone pinged off of a tower that was en route to where his classic cars were stored. Well, we know the truck was dropped off about a quarter of a mile from there.
We have witnesses who saw that truck at 12:50 on Saturday. And we know that Joe was in that area at 12:22. That tells us that Joe was in that area on his phone at that time, giving us more proof that he had the opportunity to kill Tina. This is huge.
Detectives tracked down Gary Hathaway, Joe's alibi, and asked more detailed questions about Joe's whereabouts the day of the murder.
So now we have to look a little more closely at Joe's alibi and to see if he really was at the Hathaway's house from 12:50 to 4 o'clock. And clearly he was. Mr. Hathaway said that he had been there.
But Gary Hathaway reveals to police something that has been troubling him.
He said that he saw the Porsche parked in the driveway, which is one of the cars that would normally be at a storage facility. Then he saw the Chevelle parked there also. And then Joe drove up in the red Corvette. And Mr. Hathaway said, normally there's only 2 of the classic cars parked at the house. There's never 3. Something didn't seem right to him about that. He couldn't understand how Joe got to the storage facility to get a 3rd car. That's not normal. And he thought it was odd.
Based on the phone records and Gary Hathaway's concerns, detectives start to work a new theory.
Did Joe drop the truck off with Tina's body in there, cut through the field, pick up his Corvette at the storage unit, and go home?
As detectives dismantle Joe's alibi, the neighbor Jeff Cox comes forward with some new and startling information.
The Coxes had a camera on their house, and it pointed directly, by chance, toward the Corona home. And so this video showed Joe in the truck about 11 o'clock, pulling it into the garage. Jeff Cox said that Joe had come over, and he had shown Joe the video and said, "Here you are pulling in the truck." At the time that Tina went missing, and Joe's like, "Well, I was just pulling it in so I could load the tables and the ice chests for the progressive dinner for the Corvette Club that night." Joe tells Jeff, "Don't worry about it. You don't need to keep the video. You can delete it because the police think it's a gang-involved murder."
So they didn't bother to keep it.
Jeff Cox believed his friend at the time. But as the investigation dragged on, and it was clear the murder wasn't gang-related, he realized he had valuable information on his hands.
We have probable cause to believe that Joe Corona indeed is the one who murdered Tina. However, he has now left the jurisdiction.
Detectives issue an all-points bulletin and track Joe down at a hotel in Jackson, Tennessee.
So they go to the hotel, they find out which room he's in, and they try to talk him out. He says, "I'm not coming out." He says, "I have a gun."
And then we hear click, and then click, click, click. And what he was doing, he's cocking the gun, then decocking it. Cocking it, then decocking it. So we're like, okay, good, we're fixing to get in a shootout.
It becomes very intense. You have a lot of law enforcement there with a lot of firepower.
It's not going to be a good scene.
So law enforcement just swarms in.
We get in the room. He's got a pistol with him. And we explain to him that we've got a warrant for your arrest, so you're going with us.
Detectives are now able to piece together Tina Corona's final 24 hours.
Joe and Tina wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday the 25th. As Tina is getting ready that morning, she received a phone call from Matt Struna, one of the members of the Corvette Club, in regards to helping her with anything she needs at about 10:50 in the morning. My opinion is that Tina was leaving that day. We think maybe she got some mail and opened the mail and found some information regarding some of the financial problems. And maybe she threatened Joe with all the things that he's done. His extramarital affairs, cheating people out of the money. Maybe she said, "I'm going to the authorities." So at that point, Joe panicked.
I think what he did was he grabbed her by the arm, put the bag over her head, then pushed her down on the floor and held her down on the floor with the bag over her head, suffocated her till she expired. And then Joe had backed the truck in and placed her body in the vehicle. Before he left, he called Gary Hathaway so that he could get an alibi established. And then he drove it to the location where the vehicle was found in Bartlett, which was in close proximity to the storage facility that he had classic cars in, and was able to walk there very easily, and got into another vehicle after dropping off the truck. Was able to drive back home after that.
I almost see Joe as a red-collar psychopath. Somebody who's engaging in what we would say white-collar crime or fraudulent activities to gain money. They're not violent thugs, but they still have a latent antisocial thinking that allows them to steal money from people. And then the collar turns from white to red when they commit violence in order to basically protect or preserve their own reputation.
Joe Corona is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
When someone turns out to be representing nothing but pure evil, you cease to care about that person. He didn't like anybody touching him. He liked fancy clothes. He liked fancy food. He was very fussy. So I almost get a chuckle thinking what he's going through every morning he wakes up right now.
We felt that we were able to speak for Tina and that we were able to give her justice. That was the bottom line. We wanted Tina to have justice.
So it's kind of a bittersweet ending because we got the guy. He's going to do life in prison, but that will never bring Tina Corona back to her family. I remember Tina like the sunshine. She was just really friendly and made you feel good. You were like the only person in the world that mattered to her when she was talking to you. She was just special like nobody else.
There was a beautiful woman. There was a mother who was taken from her kid by a monster.
A horrific shooting.
It was such a violent act. Shooting 8 times in under a human being.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
In this case, we have a very manipulative, empowering, and influential predator. It's a pure crime of passion. If I can't have you, nobody can. Pow.
Maybe this is kind of a conspiracy to cover up the homicide.
The truth will be revealed.
Stories upon stories, they were all fiction. He was the one that wanted her dead. Could he have shot her? Absolutely.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Pinellas Park, a small city just outside of Tampa, Florida, known for its easy proximity to beautiful beaches and lush greenery.
You have your wealthy elite, you have your folks that are just getting by. Florida in general is a very transient state, but most of these people are here for generations. I don't think Pinellas Park sees the type of crime that we see in Tampa. It's a fairly peaceful community. I would say the most common type of criminal activity in Pinellas Park is drunk driving, then your occasional car break-ins. It's certainly not the murder capital of the world or anything like that.
It's the day after the 4th of July, a Saturday night, and neighbors report hearing firecrackers just after 11 o'clock.
It's a weekend. So 4th of July weekend, you're gonna hear fireworks and stuff going off for like 2 or 3 days.
The sound doesn't draw much attention until one resident discovers the pops are not celebratory.
Troy indicated that he had heard what he believed to be firecrackers. When he went outside to see what it was, he noticed the garage door was up, and he saw his girlfriend of Sandy bleeding profusely inside her car.
First responders arrive on the scene, followed quickly by lead detectives Harry Agello and Paul Andrews of the Pinellas Police Department.
They realized it was something severe, so I was notified and responded to the scene.
The car was sitting in the garage. The body, Sandy, is in the car, and there's a large amount of blood and broken glass all over the place.
She suffered 8 separate gunshot wounds to various parts of her body, starting with her head, her torso, and the bottom of one of her feet. And initially, just looking at the shell casings, it looked to me like they were what they turned out to be, which was a .22 caliber weapon. It appeared to us that she had just been ambushed, that someone had waited or followed her to her garage before the shooting occurred.
The victim is 37-year-old Sandy Rozzo. She's rushed to the hospital but dies on arrival, and the case is officially declared a homicide.
In this particular case, it was such a horrendous act. Shooting someone 8 times, that is overkill.
Gunshot wounds can tell a certain story by their placement and by their number. So the victim being shot 8 times, we see that rage, that lack of impulse control seeping through. That suggests that this isn't, for instance, a professional hit. Someone has a pretty specific reason why they've targeted her.
But who would want to kill Sandy, a loving mother and former model, who worked hard as a bartender to make a better life for her and her daughter?
Sandy was a very devoted mother to her own daughter, Giovanna. She was always very friendly with people, very vivacious, outgoing personality. Everybody that knew her liked her. What made this shocking was the fact that a young lady was ambushed in her garage for no apparent reason at the time, just coming home from work.
Detectives must now solve Sandy's murder by focusing on the last 24 hours of her life, starting with the crime scene.
Her purse was intact, her wallet was there. No items were found to be missing.
This was not a random act of violence. This was not a robbery. You don't shoot somebody 7 or 8 times to rob them. You shoot somebody 7 or 8 times to make a point. This was personal.
The detective's top priority is to speak with Sandy's live-in boyfriend, Troy.
Well, oftentimes when someone is a victim of a homicide, it's someone very close to them or who knows them that's the suspect.
Troy must know something. He knows this woman intimately.
But when police first try to talk to Troy, he's nowhere to be found.
We were told that he'd left the scene. The patrol officers on scene thought it was unusual that Troy had left.
We find out he went right to the hospital. But that raised a red flag with people because he wanted to lock the house up before he left. Well, that's a little odd. You've got a crime scene. You've got all these police here. This is the safest address in Pinellas County when you've got 15 cops here. What do you need to lock your house up for?
Detectives have Troy come down to the station for questioning.
He was a mess, as you would expect him to be. He said that he last saw her as she left for work that same day. They worked 2 different schedules. He worked days, she worked nights.
Troy tells detectives that the morning of July 5th, he went to work at 5 a.m., and Sandy was still asleep. By the time he got home at 2 p.m., Sandy was just leaving for her job at the popular Tampa bar, the Green Iguana.
On the 5th, she was supposed to get off at around 11 o'clock that night.
Troy indicated that he heard her car driving in, and then shortly after 11 o'clock, around 11:10 or so, he had heard what he believed to be firecrackers. Well, we assumed that was the gunshots, so we were able to determine about the time that the shooting would have occurred.
So Troy walks out into the garage to make sure she's okay, and when he walks up to the car, he sees her. She's got a lot of blood, and she's not responsive.
He thought that maybe she was alive. He tried to revive her.
That's when he picks up the phone and dials 911.
He was doing everything right that a victim or a witness does. But he was our suspect. He was our number one suspect. Troy is still the first guy there at the scene, and he knows her way better than any of us do. So, we really need to focus on him and find out if he's the shooter.
Police then asked Troy about his relationship with Sandy.
He described the relationship as a romantic one. He was in love with this woman. Troy is telling us she's beautiful. She's got a daughter who's absolutely wonderful. He adored her daughter.
Troy was very happy with the relationship he had with her. He believed that they were going to get married. They just hadn't set a date sometime in the future.
I asked him, why would somebody kill Sandy? Is she involved in something else? And he says that, yeah. She said that anything ever happened to her, you need to go find Tracy Humphreys.
According to Troy, Tracy Humphrey is a dangerous ex-boyfriend of Sandy's, who assaulted and raped her after she broke it off.
Troy is concerned that Tracy Humphrey was involved in the case, but couldn't find anything in our criminal justice databases to back that up.
We had nothing. There's no Tracy Humphreys, which obviously raises a flag.
The offering says we see of a ready-made suspect, a turnkey suspect, as I say in the case of Tracy. It could be to create that distractionary suspect, to have the police go down that rabbit hole, and in the meantime buy yourself time and space and options.
As police interview Troy, something unusual catches their eye.
He had some cuts on his hand, on his shins, on his feet as well. He said it was probably from the broken glass, for when he reached inside the car to try and pull her up to see what was wrong. So you start looking at Troy again, like, well, is this guy lying to us? While we're off running on a wild goose chase, our real bad guy could be, getting rid of the evidence. This Tracy Humphreys could be our main guy, but we're not going to lose sight of Troy.
In the murder of Sandy Raza, detectives reach out to friends and family, hoping they can fill in the gaps of her final hours alive.
It's always difficult to talk to a loved one after someone that they love so much was taken from them. They can't understand how anyone could do such a violent act, shooting 8 times into another human being. Sandy's mom was devastated, and she was crushed. She described Sandy as happy-go-lucky, fun, friends with everyone. We assured Sandy's mom that we're going to seek justice. We're going to try to find the person that did this and bring them to justice.
Investigators asked Sandy's mom about Sandy's relationship with the father of her daughter.
Her daughter at that point was living with her father in Alabama. There were indications that there were some contentious issues in their relationship related to maybe the child custody issue.
Jesse, the father of the child, currently was supporting the child, and he might want sole custody. He might want to be the only parent involved in the child's life. So he might be a potential suspect.
Lots of murders are committed over child custody. Emotions run high when children are involved.
We're going to do everything we can to find out if he was involved or not. So another detective and I drove up to Alabama to meet with him.
Jesse, when the detectives talked to him, there was a level of arrogance. Why are the cops here? Why, it couldn't have been him.
Detectives take Jesse down to the local police station for questioning.
He said he would never do something like that. He said Sandy had a large part in her daughter's life, taking her on vacations, flying up there to visit her as often as she could.
Investigators look into Jesse's whereabouts on the night of July 5th, when Sandy was killed.
He said that night he was at home, watching movies with his daughter and his girlfriend.
And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, he got a phone call. And that phone call informed him that Sandra had been shot and Sandra was dead.
To confirm his story, investigators need more information from Jesse.
We got DNA from him, fingerprints from him, and, of course, phone information. You know, if someone uses a cell phone, you can find out a lot about that person, more specifically, where they're at. And at the time of the killing, around midnight, Jesse's phone records showed that he was outside the state of Florida at the time, which would have made it impossible for him to have been in Pinellas Park or anywhere near Pinellas Park at the time of the crime.
Detectives clear the father of Sandy's daughter as a suspect. Looking for new leads, they shift their focus to the Green Iguana, where Sandy was working the night she was gunned down.
The Green Iguana was a very busy, lively nightlife kind of place, more of a tourist crowd, tiki hut style bar. Sandy was successful in the job that she did. She interacted with people all the time. We actually went as far as to interview all of her coworkers, especially ones that worked with her that night. The folks she worked with were shocked, angry. Everybody that knew her liked her. So they were very upset that this had happened to her.
Detectives don't find anything suspicious about any of Sandy's colleagues, and they help fill in her timeline.
No one noticed anything unusual inside the bar that evening. And she had checked out of work at about 11:15.
We had somebody there that saw her leave when she drove out of the parking lot. To get her timeline down, we backed it up to where the time clock was, where she clocked out at about 10:45. And then we drove that route to the house. It was roughly 27 minutes of a drive. So she would have arrived home right about 11:10, give or take a minute. That means that when she clocked out of work, she would have had to have gone to her car and driven home without any stop before she was murdered.
Having narrowed down the timeline of when Sandy was last seen at 10:45 p.m., investigators questioned Sandy's coworkers about her personal life.
Earlier, Troy told us that he was in a solid relationship with Sandy and everything was just fine. But her colleagues had told a different story.
She sometimes felt she was a roommate. Sometimes she would describe Troy as a boyfriend. It appeared to us, in talking to everybody, that she had a guy that liked her, that she felt comfortable with, but that it wasn't a long-term relationship for her, that she would eventually be either moving out or moving on.
You start looking at Troy again, like, well, he's telling us one story, but her friends are all telling us something else.
Once you start lying to investigators, the investigators are going to lay hard on that person and start to look at everything they've said.
The colleagues at the Green Iguana said that she was, I guess, fixing to have a conversation with them about maybe starting to see other people.
We know that threatened separation is a trigger in domestic homicides in a good portion of cases. And so, whether it's separation, jealousy, or perhaps a combination of both could have escalated this situation.
It's possible that his feelings are hurt. Could that make Troy go off the deep end? Could he have shot her? Maybe. It's possible.
Detectives are looking closer at Sandy Razzo's boyfriend, Troy, as the prime suspect in her murder.
Sandy had indicated to people at the Green Iguana, where she worked, that she loved Troy, and she was very thankful that he provided stability, but probably wasn't in love with Troy like Troy would have liked.
He's either A, completely in the dark, or B, caught on about it, and maybe that could be a motive to kill her. True crime of passion. If I can't have you, nobody can, pow-pow.
Detectives question Troy again about Sandy's murder.
He's very distraught over this, but he's cooperating. Sometimes if you're staring at the face of evil, and they really want you to think they are not it, they may cooperate 110%. I don't know if we're dealing with a sociopath, a true actor, or if he really is absolutely has nothing to do with this.
With Troy in their crosshairs, detectives look for any evidence connecting him to Sandy's murder.
We searched his car and his house, and there was no gun, no blood, nothing that at that point there really stood out as suspicious.
Detectives confront Troy about his relationship with Sandy, telling him that coworkers painted a picture that was less than perfect.
He was in a state of shock. He felt the relationship was maybe more serious, and she felt like it wasn't, but he didn't know she felt that way yet.
Even though Sandy may have been preparing to leave him, Troy claims it didn't change his feelings for her.
I think I do think he felt very devoted to her. That's the way he exhibited it to us.
Even if Sandy's point of view of the relationship was way different than his, Troy was in love with this woman. And everything about her that he talked about was in a very loving and nurturing manner.
Detectives revisit the timeline to confirm Troy's story.
Here, establishing a time frame is important. We know what time she clocked out, what time he calls 911. Those are your two constants. Those are your two things that you can say, okay, this is definite. We have a time card, we've got a 911 call.
Sandy arrived home right about 11:10. That would confirm his story of when he heard the shot and him coming down to the garage and finding Sandy and then making the 911 call.
At this point here, everything that he told us, everything that I saw, everything that I observed about him, it seemed to be consistent with somebody that just lost or just saw the love of his life being, shot to death in a car, her blood everywhere.
Law enforcement eliminated Troy as a suspect as having been involved in the crime at all.
With Troy cleared in Sandy's murder, the investigation hits a roadblock.
We're frustrated. Who else would have had the motivation to have this done? Who would kill her?
She's a mother, trying to put money away and really have a successful life. And when you start thinking about how she was killed, how she was shot, how many times, we really need to find the bad guy and lock him up.
Then detectives receive an unexpected break. Sandy's boyfriend Troy finds a folder belonging to her at the house. He believes it's filled with important information.
Troy gave detectives a folder that proved to be pretty valuable because they were the words of Sandy. So it was kind of words from the grave.
The folder contains Sandy's handwritten notes about her upcoming trial against a man she charged with rape, assault, and forcible confinement.
Sandy was going to be testifying in a courtroom in Tampa, and she was going to be testifying against a man by the name of Timothy Humphrey for committing the crime of sexual battery and beating her. And that case was scheduled to go to trial shortly after this crime occurred. I believe it was in August, about a month away, that trial was going to take place.
Troy previously told police that Sandy's violent ex-boyfriend was named Tracy Humphrey.
It was in that documentation that we found that out, that his alias was Tracy, but that his given name was Timothy. Now we had his date of birth and all his information. That was the first key to really breaking the case open. Now we can start digging into this a lot more.
So when we got the real name, Timothy, we find out, whoa, this guy's got a problem with women.
Mr. Humphrey had served in prison for 8 years. If I had $1 for every woman he was violent on, I'd be a rich man today. I mean, he was always violent.
Then investigators learn more about Tracy's horrific ties to Sandy.
It was a year or so earlier. He kidnapped Sandy, held her against her will, and repeatedly sexually abused her over a course of days. She ended up escaping the apartment or wherever it was, and was found by a Hillsborough County deputy in the middle of the night, naked and beat up.
Throughout the ordeal, Tracy threatened her life, saying if she reported the attack, he would kill her, because he didn't want to go back to prison.
He was looking at prison time for what he had done to her, and there were court dates that had come up very recently for her, and there was more on the horizon.
Even though Sandy was afraid and fearful of Tracy Humphrey, she was willing to come forward and testify in a courtroom and point the finger at the person who had sexually molested her and beat her.
They had a victim that was willing to testify. They had DNA evidence. They have photographs. That was a good, solid case. And for that to go to trial, he was looking at quite a number of years for that. But Sandy was the only witness in that case. And if she wasn't able to testify, the case was going to get dropped or be what's called null prost, which means the state would not prosecute or proceed with the charge. You talk about a motive. That's a whole lot of motive. So at that point, Tracy or Timothy Humphreys really does become our number one suspect.
That's a big game changer. Like, he went from who to the top guy on their list.
Detectives have their sights set on Timothy, a.k.a. Tracy Humphrey, for the murder of Sandy Rozzo.
She was scared to death of Tracy, and now we've got a handwritten note that said if anything ever happens to me, go find Tracy Humphreys.
Armed with new details about Sandy's potential killer, detectives track him down at a gym in the nearby town of Brandon, where he lives and works.
He was a strong, well-built personal trainer, worked out a lot. That was his job. That was his livelihood. A lot of people referred to him as the Mr. Clean. Tall, 6'2", 210 pounds, bald, wears an earring.
He acted like a domineering type personality where he felt like he was in charge.
Detectives tell Tracy Sandy's been murdered and question him about their relationship.
When he was told it was about the homicide, he acted like he was surprised. The initial impression was that he probably was hiding something about what he knew.
When detectives ask Tracy when he last had contact with Sandy, he shuts down the conversation.
At that time, he, what we call in the business, lawyered up. He said that he had a lawyer, and he'd be more than happy to talk to law enforcement if his lawyer was present, and his lawyer didn't want him to answer any further questions from law enforcement.
As detectives wrap up the conversation, they notice Tracy's wearing a wedding band.
Later, we found out that he had recently gotten married to a lady by the name of Ashley Laney.
Ashley was significantly younger. Not that we would judge that, but yeah, he was in his 30s and she was 19, maybe 20 at the time.
Hoping Tracy's new wife will be more forthcoming with information, detectives travel to their home in Brandon to talk to her.
When they went in to speak to her, she appeared to them to be nervous, but she did indicate that they had gotten married on July 4th. The day they got married was the day before the homicide occurred, and so that was very interesting to us.
Sandy Rozzo was murdered on July 5th, so that is intriguing because in Florida law, a lot of people believe that if you're married to someone and you're somehow in cahoots over a crime, that the spouse won't have to testify against the other spouse.
Detectives question Ashley about Tracy's whereabouts on July 5th, the night Sandy was killed.
She indicated, of course, that she knew nothing about the crime, knew nothing about Sandra being shot.
She told the detectives that on the night of the homicide, at 11 p.m., they were home together watching a movie, having pizza. And she said that they had a friend named Toby White who had come over and visited them at the house that night.
Then, in the middle of being interviewed by police, Ashley receives a phone call from her lawyer.
Tracy was very quick to have a conversation with what we believe was his attorney and have her tell Ashley that she did not have to cooperate. In fact, the detectives could hear the voice on the phone telling her exactly what to say to the detectives. So it was very, very suspicious.
Then, another surprising interruption.
Much to everyone's chagrin, Tracy showed up, and it was very clear that he was trying to get her to shut up and not talk.
He appeared to the detectives to be angry, frustrated just in his demeanor, through his body language and the look on his face.
That sort of got some gears turning in the detectives' heads that maybe there was a conspiracy to cover up what had happened with Sandy Rozzo, and perhaps was connected to the homicide. Even though Ashley is no longer talking, the detectives have gained an important new lead. Ashley and Tracy Humphrey's alibi for the night of Sandy Rozzo's murder was pizza. So, we went to the pizza restaurant, found the driver, found the ticket for it,
The pizza was ordered using Tracy's cell phone on July 5th at 10:49 p.m. and delivered 15 minutes later.
The driver says that, yeah, I remember this guy. Gave me a $20 tip for a $12 pizza. Oh, yeah, I remember a guy. Bald, big guy, yeah. No doubt.
Other than just pizza, he got his alibi delivered to law enforcement.
With Tracy's alibi placing him in Brandon, 40 minutes from the crime scene, detectives determine he can't be the killer.
That had to take the wind out of the sails of the detectives a little bit, because they were like, oh, we thought it was him. It fit.
It's always disappointing to have a setback, like this one involving the alibi that ends up being firmed up. But at the same time, you need to be able to rebound and consider all possible options. In this case, what else is going on involving Ashley? And is she then the weak link that police need to be focusing on?
When detectives look into Ashley's background, they find an incident that piques their interest.
She'd been a pretty good student. She'd been a pretty good kid. She didn't have a criminal history, and she didn't have any problems. But we found out that she had reported her car as being stolen, and her car had shown up in a street in Tampa and had been put on fire. Law enforcement had got a call from a fire investigator with the State Fire Marshal's Service, who had found it very bizarre that the car had been found torched.
It's an arson. It's not hard to tell when a car's been burnt up with arson. There's usually quite a bit of evidence left behind that indicates that it was an accelerant used. And in this case, it was quite a bit.
Police look into the arson and learn that the same day that her car was found on fire, Ashley visited a firing range in the Tampa area.
Ashley Humphrey, we found, had been at a firing range. She had been there with Timothy Humphrey, and she had been learning to shoot a .22 caliber type of weapon. That was important information because we knew the type of gun that was utilized to kill Sandy was a .22 caliber.
Now dots start getting connected.
To learn more about Ashley and how she might be involved in Sandy's murder, detectives talk with her family.
What was really interesting was when they met with Mom's boyfriend, he says that he loaned Ashley a handgun, which happened to be the same caliber as the type used in the homicide, a .22 caliber, and he'd been asking for her to give the weapon back, and she hadn't yet returned it. We felt strong that we were on the right track, but you have to be careful in any investigation, but particularly homicides, that you don't get thrown off.
Then, Ashley's mother provides detectives with an even more shocking piece of information.
We were told in an interview with Ashley's mom that Ashley had told her that Sandy had been killed, and Sandy was shot 8 times. Now, that information was very important to law enforcement because no media had indicated 8 shots. That was never told to anyone, so that was an information that only law enforcement knew about, and the shooter would have known about.
You know, as we start putting the case together, it's obvious that Ashley's involved, but there would be no reason for her to want Sandra dead, but for the case against Tracy.
Detectives then uncover crucial information that confirms they're working in the right direction.
So we got the phone records from Timothy Humphrey. We got the phone records from Ashley Humphrey. And we were able to determine that Timothy Humphrey's phone during the time of the crime was bouncing off a phone tower right near his Brandon residence.
While the cell phone records confirm that Tracy is where he said he was, the same can't be said for Ashley.
The cell phone records blew apart the alibi of her being at home all night.
Ashley's phone was being utilized outside the Green Iguana at about 4:30.
Her cell phone is telling them that she was right there. Not only that, but she was active on the cell phone. She called many times from the parking lot. And who was she calling? Tracy.
Then at about 10:45, that cell phone started to move once Sandy started to go home over the bridge into Pinellas County and bouncing off towers right outside of Sandy's house.
There she is, going closer to Pinellas Park. Ping, ping, ping. And then when she gets to the house, ping again.
I think we got her.
Tracy Humphrey's wife, Ashley, is now the prime suspect in the murder of Sandy Razzo. But detectives don't believe she acted alone.
Phone records pointed to the fact that Tracy Humphrey was involved. Tracy Humphrey had the motive. He had the desire. He had the will. He was the one that wanted her dead.
Looking for more evidence, detectives turned to Toby White, the friend visiting the Humphreys at their home the night Sandy Razzo was killed.
Toby White was an upstanding citizen. She didn't have any criminal history. We brought her in. I asked her questions, put her under oath. She had been a client of Mr. Humphrey's. Mr. Humphrey had turned her life around pretty much in her eyes, her health, her weight, and she felt beholding to Mr. Humphrey.
Police asked Toby where she was the night of July 5th, and she confirms Tracy's story, saying she was at the Humphreys' house from 9:30 p.m. until midnight.
So initially, Toby gives a statement of her being at the house with Ashley and Tracy, and they did have a pizza delivered. When we also have the cell phone records now, I realize that's not possible. Ashley was not at the house at the time.
We told her. Basically, we didn't believe what she told us.
Lying under oath or on a sworn statement is perjury, a federal crime, and Toby could go to jail.
She would be facing criminal charges for perjury for lying, so she did recant and tell the truth as to what had occurred. Toby White's news story was that she did not see Ashley that evening, and she did not see Timothy Humphrey that evening, and she gave that a false alibi because Mr. Humphrey had requested her to do so.
In hindsight, she realized that Tracy and Ashley were lying to her about what occurred and their involvement in the homicide.
On December 18th, 2003, Ashley Humphrey is arrested for the first-degree murder of Sandy Razzo. Without enough hard evidence linking Tracy to the crime, investigators charge him instead with a federal firearms violation.
Timothy Humphrey was a convicted felon, and he couldn't own firearms, couldn't use firearms, so he would be unable to go to a firing range and handle the firearm. So we decided to arrest Mr. Humphrey on those charges, and he was held in custody in Hillsborough County. We wanted Mr. Humphrey to be separated from Ashley Humphrey. We wanted Mr. Humphrey not to be able to influence her.
With Ashley now in custody and away from Tracy, detectives are hoping she'll give them more information about the crime, but she won't talk.
When you have a character like Tracy, I don't think you can underestimate the kind of power that he could wield over Ashley. He had a past where he had been violent, and you have to wonder if Ashley did this because she was afraid of him.
Detectives dig deeper into Tracy's past, hoping to find some information that could compel Ashley to talk.
You know, stories upon stories that he told her, they were all fiction.
We found out that Tracy was bisexual.
Tracy had been in a relationship with another man, and Ashley knew nothing about those type of things. And she began to see that perhaps her whole relationship, the marriage and everything else, was all built on lies.
Of course, you're sitting in jail. You have to be wondering, have I been manipulated? And then all of a sudden, you learn that this guy who you're taking the fall for, that you could go to prison for the rest of your life for, has been cheating on you. So that was the final straw.
Stunned after realizing Tracy is not who he said he was, Ashley confesses to Sandy's murder and tells detectives where the murder weapon is buried.
We found the gun, which wasn't far from where I believe her mother lived. That's northeastern Hillsborough County.
Once Ashley starts talking, she reveals key information.
From day one, Tracy convinced Ashley that he loved her, and if they were to spend their life together, his problems with Sandy would need to go away, or else he was going to go to prison because he was being falsely accused, he said.
Ashley also admits she tried to kill Sandy once before.
The first attempt was several weeks earlier. Ashley's goal at that point there was to shoot Sandy as she left the bar. Ashley was zeroing in on Sandy, and she pulls the trigger, and I realizes that the bullet went through her mirror on the car, Well, that's going to be evidence. So, Ashley and Tracy, in order to make the evidence disappear, had the car taken to a vacant lot where they set it on fire.
As more and more evidence reveals Tracy's connection to the crime, police now feel confident they have enough to charge him with murder.
She was his firearm. Tracy pointed Ashley in the direction of his problem, which was Sandy, and she pulled the trigger. We wanted Tracy Humphrey. He was the person behind this crime. But for Tracy Humphrey, Sandy would be alive today. But for Tracy Humphrey, Ashley would have never done this crime.
The power dynamic in Ashley and Tracy's relationship underscores something called the Svengali defense. And this is a term in reference to the literary character Svengali, who's able to hypnotize and put sort of younger, naive women under his spell. And in this case, we have that exact scenario. Someone who, on their own, would never have committed this crime and was essentially duped into committing this crime by a very manipulative, overpowering, and unduly influential predator.
From Ashley's full confession, investigators are able to piece together Sandy Razzo's final 24 hours.
It took a lot to put this case together. Every little thing is a small piece of a very large puzzle.
On July 5th, the day of the murder, Sandy starts her shift at 2:30 p.m. As she works the bar, Ashley drives to the Green Iguana at 4:37 p.m. and lays in wait for Sandy in the parking lot.
She had the .22 revolver at this time, the gun that she had borrowed from her stepfather. Tracy was directing her. During that period of time, there was a substantial number of phone calls between the two.
Ashley had waited outside the bar until Sandy was done with work.
Sandy pulls out of the parking lot at 10:45 p.m.
And Ashley follows Sandy home.
Sandy gets home at 11:10 p.m. and pulls her car into the garage. Ashley enters right behind her.
Ashley looked into the window, driver's side window, saw Sandy, and then began to fire. Sandy was trapped. She couldn't get out of the car. She put up her feet against the window, backing up towards the other side of the passenger side. And Ashley continued to shoot and emptied the firearm, shooting her 8 times.
Tracy had told her, make sure that you look in her eyes and you can see that she's dead. And indeed, that's what she did.
After she kills Sandy in cold blood, the first call Ashley makes is to Tracy.
She said, "It's done. Now can I have my pizza?"
I mean, seriously, she orders a pizza. She just whacks a girl, pumps 8 rounds into a girl, and wants a pizza. Really? With extra cheese. He had told her that it's too late, I already ordered the pizza. Psycho.
In exchange for her cooperation, Ashley makes a plea deal. 25 years in prison for her testimony against Tracy Humphrey.
We would have loved to have prosecuted Tracy without giving Ashley a deal. Everybody has asked me, what do you think of her getting 25 years? To be honest with you, she should be life imprisonment.
A jury finds Tracy guilty of murder and sentences him to life without parole.
Tracy Humphrey was a controlling and violent person who thought he could get away with murder. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, and he'll die in prison, and that's what I think all the family members and everyone wanted.
The part that stays with me is the bravery shown by Sandy Rozzo and the chance that she took to see that Tracy Humphrey was prosecuted, knowing that it perhaps would put her at risk, but that she didn't want to see other women victimized like she had been. One thing that I think is really important to remember about this case is Sandy Rozzo died a hero. And in many ways, I feel, very inspired by that. In some ways, I feel very sad.
There was a woman, a beautiful woman, who was a mother, who was taken from her kid. by a mobster. And my heart breaks for her family. My heart breaks for her daughter.